You wouldn't survive a day as a Roman gladiator because you were never meant to. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to bleed, to entertain. And if you died screaming under the sun, so much the better. Gladiators weren't heroes. They were slaves, criminals, and desperate men, weapons wrapped in human flesh. The training broke your body. The rules broke your spirit. And the crowd, they didn't want you to win. They wanted a show. Every cheer from the stands meant one thing: fight harder or die louder. In the Roman Empire, few professions were as fatal as this one. While the image of the gladiator might evoke strength, fame, or even freedom, the truth was far more brutal. These men, and occasionally women, were property, bought and sold like livestock, trained not for victory, but for spectacle. Some were prisoners of war, others condemned criminals, and a rare few were volunteers, drawn by the hope of glory or desperate for coin. But once you passed through the gates of the ludus, the training school, it no longer mattered how you got there. What mattered was how long you could last. Your days were dictated by routine and violence. At dawn, before the sun rose fully over the walls, the trainers, former gladiators themselves, barked out commands. You began with drills, footwork on gravel that shredded your skin, shield blocks that left your arms trembling, sword swings with heavy wooden weapons designed to exhaust you. The goal wasn't to hone technique for some noble duel. It was to condition your body to move on instinct, to fight even when pain blurred your vision and your hands no longer felt like your own. There was no camaraderie in the barracks. Gladiators didn't make friends. Attachment meant grief, and grief had no place in a world where the man you laughed with today might be the one ordered to kill you tomorrow. Silence and caution kept you alive longer than kindness ever could. You didn't choose what kind of fighter you would be. That decision was made for you based on your build, your demeanour, and what the crowd preferred. If you were agile, you might become a retiarius, wielding a net and trident, wearing almost no armour. If you were broad-shouldered and slow-moving, you might be assigned the role of a murmillo, heavy shield, gladius, and an oppressive bronze helmet, with narrow eye slits that made the arena feel like a coffin. Each type had its counterpart, and match-ups were carefully arranged for drama, not fairness. You were fed better than most slaves, not as a kindness, but as a necessity. The crowd wanted to see strength, not starvation. Meals consisted of barley, beans, dried figs, and occasionally meat. You weren't being nourished, you were being prepared, built into something marketable, something the crowd would cheer for when your blood hit the sand. Eventually, your name was called. It might have been days, it might have been weeks. Time lost meaning when every hour was pain and repetition. But eventually, it came. You were led to the armamentarium to be outfitted, not with custom gear, but with whatever armour and weaponry matched your role and happened to fit. Your body was oiled, your face dusted, and your old name discarded. A new one was given, something exotic, theatrical, something the crowd could shout. You waited in the darkness beneath the arena, listening to the dull roar above. Tens of thousands of Romans gathered, dressed in their finest tunics, sipping watered wine and placing bets. They were not here to witness skill. They were here to see pain. A man screaming. A man dying. A man cut down, not in war, but for amusement. And then the gate opened, blinding light, the scent of blood and sweat thick in the air, the roar of the crowd swallowing your thoughts. You stepped onto the sand, heart pounding, mouth dry. Across from you, another gladiator, one you may have trained beside, eaten beside, But now he was your enemy, not by choice, but by design. The fight was not always to the death, but death came easily. Wounds festered, armour failed, panic struck at the worst moments, and even if you fought well, even if you won, it wasn't over until the crowd was satisfied. If you were defeated but still breathing, your fate hung on their whim. The thumb not necessarily turned down, as popular myth suggests, but gestured in some signal of life or death, determined everything. The victor had to wait, sometimes awkwardly, for a decision, and if the signal came for death, he had to finish it cleanly, quickly, honourably. A stab beneath the ribs, up into the heart, practised, cold. If the crowd granted mercy, it wasn't because they loved you, it was because you made them feel something. Perhaps you fought bravely, perhaps you bled beautifully, perhaps you begged just convincingly enough to make them pause, but that mercy came with a cost. You would fight again, and again, until your luck ran out. Even those who survived long enough to earn a rudies, a symbolic wooden sword signifying freedom, carried permanent damage. Torn muscles, broken bones that never healed properly. Mental wounds, far worse. Few ever reached that stage, fewer still lived long after it. And for those not fortunate enough to be trained, armed and fed in the ludus, the fate was far worse. Some were thrown into the arena with no protection, no training, condemned criminals or prisoners destined to die. Others were forced to face wild animals, sometimes unarmed, as the crowd howled with laughter. These weren't contests, they were executions dressed as entertainment. This wasn't a sport, it was a system, one that chewed through bodies and lives in exchange for distraction. In a city where politics were brutal and public unrest constant, the games were a tool. Bread and circuses. Feed the belly, feed the bloodlust, and keep the people quiet. You wouldn't survive a day as a Roman gladiator, not because you lacked skill or heart or strength, but because none of that mattered. Not to the empire, not to the trainers, not to the crowd. You were never meant to survive. If you made it through this, try surviving ancient Rome's filthiest district next. It's even worse. And if you're into the brutal side of history, like the video and subscribe.